If you'd asked me a year ago how my life was going, I would have told you everything was perfect. Amelia and I had been married for 8 years. We had a beautiful house in the suburbs, a dog named Riley who thought we hung the moon, and plans to start a family soon. Life was simple, steady, until it wasn't. The first sign was small, almost unnoticeable. Amelia started getting distant. At first, I chalked it up to stress from work. She'd just started a new role in her marketing firm, and I knew the pressure was high. But it wasn't just the stress. It was how she'd come home, barely say a word, and bury herself in her phone. Our conversations felt like chores, like she was going through the motions just to keep me from asking questions. Then there were the girls' nights. Amelia wasn't exactly the social butterfly type. She had a close circle of friends, sure, but suddenly she was out almost every weekend. When I asked who she was with, it was always the same, just Brittany and Sarah, you know, the girls. But there was something off in the way she said it, too casual, too rehearsed, and that's when Ethan started popping up more. Ethan had been my best friend since we were kids. We'd grown up on the same street, rode our bikes to school together, and even roomed in the same dorm in college. He was the guy I called when life got messy, the one who stood by me as my best man when Amelia and I tied the knot. He was practically family, but lately, Ethan had been around a lot at first. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? He was my best friend. He'd drop by unannounced like he always did, crack open a beer, and talk about old times. But then I noticed the looks. The lingering glances between him and Amelia when they thought I wasn't paying attention. The way they'd laugh at jokes I didn't get, like there was some inside story I wasn't part of. I told myself I was being paranoid. Amelia loved me. Ethan was my brother in everything but blood. There was no way anything was going on, but sometimes, the truth is like a splinter. The more you ignore it, the deeper it digs in, and I was about to find out just how deep that splinter went. A few weeks passed, and the uneasy feeling in my gut only grew stronger. Amelia's girls' nights became more frequent, and Ethan was always around when she wasn't. At first, I tried to brush it off, but you can't ignore a storm when you hear the thunder rolling in. The tipping point came on an ordinary Thursday. Amelia had left early that morning, claiming she had a big meeting at work and would probably be late. I didn't think much of it until I got a call from Mike, a mutual friend of Ethan and mine, who worked downtown. "Hey, man," Mike said, his voice casual but laced with something off. "You didn't tell me Amelia got a new job at the Oak Room." I frowned. The Oak Room wasn't an office, it was a trendy little bar in the heart of the city, the kind of place that hosted live music and served overpriced cocktails. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my stomach twisting. "I just saw her there. With Ethan. They looked pretty cozy, man." My heart sank. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe they just ran into each other, maybe it was a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. After hanging up with Mike, I stared at my phone for a long time, my mind racing. Then I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make, that I was going to find out for myself. That evening, Amelia texted me around 6, saying the meeting was running late and she'd probably grab dinner with the girls. I didn't respond. I just grabbed my keys, called Riley to stay, and drove downtown, my heart pounding harder with every mile. The Oak Room was dimly lit, its sleek interior buzzing with the after-work crowd. I walked in, scanning the room, hoping, praying that Mike was wrong, but he wasn't. There they were. Amelia and Ethan, tucked into a corner booth, heads close together, laughing like they were sharing some intimate secret. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, and his gaze wasn't the look of a friend. It was the kind of look a man gives a woman when he wants more. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I could have confronted them right then and there, caused a scene in front of everyone. But I didn't. I just stood there for a moment, taking it all in: the betrayal, the lies, the realization that everything I thought I knew was a lie. Then I turned and walked out, my heart pounding in my chest like a war drum. I had all the proof I needed. Now, it was just a matter of what I was going to do next. Driving home that night felt like I was floating outside of my own body. The city lights blurred past me, but I wasn't really seeing them. My mind was stuck on that corner booth at the Oak Room, the way Amelia leaned in toward Ethan, the way he looked at her like I didn't exist, like we didn't exist. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. Riley barked from inside, sensing me before I even opened the door. But I didn't greet him like I usually did. I just stood in the dark, staring at the front door, thinking about all the years Amelia and I had built together, the vacations, the late-night talks, the plans we made for a family. It felt like all of that had been set on fire. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room with the lights off, waiting. Every tick of the clock echoed in my head, a countdown to the confrontation I knew was coming. At 2:13 a.m., the front door finally creaked open. I heard the soft shuffle of Amelia's footsteps, the jingle of her keys as she dropped them into the bowl by the door. She humming like she'd just come back from a relaxing night with friends. I let her walk all the way to the kitchen before I spoke. Have fun at your meeting? The sound of my voice in the dark made her jump. She spun around, her eyes wide, hand clutching her chest. Jesus, Jake. You scared me. She flicked on the kitchen light, and for a moment, her face was just confusion. But then she saw my expression, the calm before the storm, and her smile faltered. Where were you, Amelia? She blinked, her face morphing into that practiced look of innocence she'd perfected over the years. I told you, I had a meeting. Then Brittany and Sarah wanted to grab a quick bite, cut the crap. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. I know where you were. Her mouth opened like she was going to protest, but the words died before they even formed. She knew. I knew. The game was over. I stood up from the couch, closing the distance between us. You were at the Oak Room. With Ethan. For a second, I thought she might deny it. But then something in her face shifted. The surprise melted away, replaced by something colder, indifference. So what if I was, she said, her voice icy, that hit harder than any denial could have. I stared at her, waiting for her to crack, waiting for the woman I married to feel something. But she didn't. How long, Amelia? I asked quietly. How long have you been screwing my best friend? She crossed her arms over her chest, her chin tilting up defiantly. Does it matter? I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. It matters to me. My voice echoed off the walls, and Riley whimpered from the corner, sensing the tension. Amelia didn't flinch. She just shrugged, like this was some minor inconvenience she had to deal with. A few months, she finally said, her tone flat. But honestly, Jake, it's been over between us for a lot longer than that. Her words felt like a slap to the face. Over? That was news to me. We'd had our problems, every marriage does, but I never imagined it had come to this. You could have talked to me, I whispered, more to myself than to her. You could have told me instead of sneaking around like a coward. She rolled her eyes, like I was the one being unreasonable. And what would that have changed? You were already checked out. You just didn't want to admit it. I stared at her, trying to find even a shred of the woman I married. But she was gone. I took a deep breath, my anger simmering just below the surface. You need to leave. That caught her off guard. For the first time that night, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. What? You heard me, I said, my voice steady. Pack your things and get out. You and Ethan deserve each other. She opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but then she stopped. She just stared at me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before finally turning on her heel and heading upstairs. I stood there in the kitchen, listening to the sounds of drawers opening and closing, the quiet zip of her suitcase. Every sound felt like another nail in the coffin of our marriage. When she finally came back down, suitcase in hand, she paused by the door. This is your fault, you know, she said quietly, not looking at me. You made it too easy to leave. And with that, she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving me standing there in the silence, wondering how the hell everything had fallen apart so fast. But deep down, I knew that it hadn't fallen apart overnight, that I'd just finally seen the cracks. The door clicked shut behind Amelia, and just like that, 8 years of marriage vanished into the night with the quiet roll of suitcase wheels down the driveway. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the spot where she'd been, half expecting her to walk back in, laughing like it was some sick joke, but she didn't come back, and it wasn't a joke. That I don't know how long I stood there, but eventually, the numbness faded, and something heavier settled in its place. Anger? Sure. But it wasn't just anger. It was betrayal. Confusion. This hollow ache that felt like someone had ripped out a part of me and left nothing behind to fill the space. Riley padded over, resting his head against my leg like he knew I needed something, anything to anchor me. I reached down, running my fingers through his fur, trying to steady my breathing. But no matter how many deep breaths I took, the reality wouldn't change. That my wife, the woman I built a life with, had been cheating on me with my best friend, and now, both of them were gone. That I crashed onto the couch, the weight of everything finally catching up to me. The house felt too big, too quiet. Every corner reminded me of Amelia. The framed photos on the wall, the blanket she always used on the couch, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air. That I wanted to rip it all down. Burn it. Erase every trace of her from my life, but instead, I just sat there, staring at nothing, letting the emptiness wash over me. The next morning felt surreal. I woke up on the couch, my neck stiff, the sunlight pouring through the windows like it was mocking me. For a second, I forgot everything that had happened. But then the memories came rushing back, and the hollow ache in my chest settled in again. That I stumbled into the kitchen, made a cup of coffee out of habit, and stared at the cup like it held the answers to all my problems. That's when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting a message from Mike or one of the guys checking in. But it wasn't. It was Ethan. For a moment, I just stared at the screen, disbelief coursing through me. He had the nerve to reach out after everything? After betraying me in the worst possible way. I opened the message, my heart pounding in my chest. Jake, man, I know you're pissed. But it's not what you think. Can we talk? I laughed, an empty, bitter sound that didn't feel like it belonged to me. Not what I think. I'd seen them together. I'd heard Amelia admit it herself. There was no misunderstanding here. I typed out a quick response, my fingers trembling with rage. There's nothing to talk about. You made your choice. Now live with it. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the counter, my heart racing. But the message didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it just reminded me of how deep the betrayal cut. It wasn't just Amelia. It was Ethan, too, the guy who'd been by my side through every major moment of my life. The guy I trusted like a brother, and now? Now he was just another stranger who'd walked out of my life without looking back. That evening, Mike showed up unannounced, a six-pack in one hand and a concerned look on his face. Figured you could use some company, he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. We cracked open a couple of beers, and for a while, we just sat there in silence, the unspoken tension filling the room. Finally, Mike broke the silence. I'm sorry, man. I can't believe they did this to you. I shrugged, staring at the floor. Yeah. Me neither. He leaned forward, his voice low and serious. You know, I never trusted Ethan. There was always something off about him. I frowned, glancing up. Why didn't you say anything? Mike sighed. Because I didn't have proof. And you were happy. Or at least, I thought you were. I didn't want to be the guy who planted doubts. I nodded, understanding but wishing I'd seen the signs sooner. Wishing someone had. We sat in silence for a bit longer, nursing our beers, until Mike finally spoke again. What are you gonna do now? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know how to move forward from this. Divorce was inevitable, sure, but it wasn't just about ending the marriage. It was about figuring out how to live with the betrayal. How to trust again. How to rebuild a life that had been torn apart by the two people I trusted most. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let this break me. The days after Amelia left were a blur. Time didn't feel real. It was like I was living in a bad dream I couldn't wake up from, stuck in the same loop of disbelief and anger. I'd get up in the morning, stare at the empty side of the bed, and wonder how the hell everything fell apart so fast. Riley was the only thing keeping me sane. Dogs have this way of grounding you, like they don't care about your messy emotions, they just want you to throw the ball or fill the food bowl. And honestly, that was exactly what I needed. Something simple. Something real, but the rest of it? The silence in the house, the absence of Amelia's voice, her things, her scent, it was suffocating. So I started clearing her out of my life first, the little things. Her toothbrush, her shampoo, that god-awful cardigan she always left draped over the couch. I stuffed it all into garbage bags and shoved them in the garage. I couldn't bring myself to throw them out completely, not yet, but getting them out of sight was a start. The photos were next. At first, I thought I'd just leave them. What was the point of erasing the past? But every time I walked past our wedding picture in the hallway, I felt like I was being punched in the gut. That frozen smile, the way she looked at me in that photo like I was her entire world, it was all so down they came. I didn't smash them. I didn't burn them. I just packed them away, one by one, sealing the box shut like I was burying a part of my life. Because in a way, Mike kept checking in, making sure I wasn't completely losing it. He'd stop by after work with a six-pack, and we'd sit in the backyard, drinking in silence. Sometimes we'd talk about Amelia and Ethan, but mostly, we just talked about anything but them. Sports, work, dumb stuff from when we were kids. It helped. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded me that life was still moving, even if I felt stuck. But no matter how much I tried to distract myself, the questions kept creeping in. Why did she do it? When did it start? Was there something I could have done to stop it? I knew the answers didn't matter. But my brain wouldn't let it go. Betrayal messes with your head like that. It makes you doubt everything yourself, your judgment, your worth. A week after Amelia left, I got a letter in the mail. Not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter. I recognized her handwriting immediately. For a minute, I just stared at it, debating whether to even open it. Part of me wanted to rip it to shreds without reading a single word. But curiosity's a cruel thing. I sat down at the kitchen table, Riley at my feet, and opened it. Jake, I know you probably hate me. I don't blame you. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I just want to explain. I almost stopped reading right there. Explain? What was there to explain? She cheated. She lied. She broke everything we built. But I kept going. I didn't plan for any of this to happen. Ethan and it just happened. I felt lost for a long time, and he was there. I know that doesn't make it right, but I need you to understand that it wasn't about you. You didn't do anything wrong. I laughed, an empty, bitter sound. It wasn't about me? That was supposed to make me feel better? I hope one day you'll find someone who makes you happy, someone who gives you the love I couldn't. I'm sorry for hurting you. Amelia. I folded the letter and tossed it in the trash. Sorry didn't even begin to cover it. That night, as I sat in the backyard with Mike, staring up at the stars, I realized something, that I wasn't just angry at Amelia. I wasn't just heartbroken, that I was freed. It didn't feel like it yet, but I knew deep down that this was the start of something new. Something better. Amelia and Ethan could have each other. I didn't need their lies, their drama, their betrayal. I had my life back, and I was going to figure out what to do with it. The days kept rolling by, and while the sting of Amelia and Ethan's betrayal hadn't completely faded, it started to feel less like a fresh wound and more like an old scar. I was figuring out how to exist in the space they'd left behind. It wasn't easy, but it was happening. But just when I thought things were starting to settle, life threw me another curveball. It was a Friday evening. I just finished walking Riley and was settling in with a beer, thinking about maybe finally unpacking that box of Amelia's things from the garage just to throw them out for good. That's when my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, thinking it was Mike or another friend checking in. But when I glanced at the screen, my stomach dropped. It was Ethan. My finger hovered over the screen. I debated just deleting the message without reading it, but that same curiosity that made me read Amelia's letter kicked in. I opened it. Jake, I know you probably want nothing to do with me. But I need to see you. It's important. I stared at the message, my pulse quickening. Important? What could possibly be important enough for him to think I'd want to meet? I sat there, staring at the screen, torn between the urge to tell him to go to hell and the gnawing curiosity that wouldn't let me ignore it. After a few minutes, I did something I didn't expect. I replied. Meet me at the Rusty Anchor. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. One drink. That's it. If he had something to say, I was going to hear it. Not because I wanted to forgive him, but because I needed closure. I needed to look him in the eye and understand why. The next day felt like a countdown. I tried to keep busy, mowed the lawn, cleaned out the garage, even reorganized my kitchen cabinets like I was preparing for a cooking show. But no matter how much I distracted myself, my mind kept drifting back to what Ethan could possibly want. By the time 6:30 rolled around, I was already out the door, driving toward the Rusty Anchor, a small dive bar on the edge of town where we used to hang out after college. The place hadn't changed much. Same flickering neon sign, same sticky floors, same dim lighting that made everything feel just a little off. I got there early, grabbed a booth in the back, and ordered a beer. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching longer than the last, until finally, I saw him walk in. Ethan. He looked different. Not in a physical way. He still had the same scruffy beard, the same easygoing walk, but there was something in his eyes. Something heavy. Like the weight of what he'd done was finally catching up to him. He spotted me and made his way over, his steps slower than usual, like he wasn't sure if I'd actually throw a punch the second he sat down. Jake, he said quietly, sliding into the booth across from me. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him, waiting. For a moment, we sat there in silence, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, he cleared his throat. I know I'm the last person you want to see, he started, his voice low. And I deserve that. But I needed to tell you something. I raised an eyebrow, my patience wearing thin. You needed to tell me you're a backstabbing piece of trash. Because I figured that out on my own. He winced, but he didn't argue. I deserve that, he repeated. But Jake, it's not just about Amelia. I frowned, my heart skipping a beat. What the hell are you talking about? He ran a hand through his hair, looking more uncomfortable than I'd ever seen him. She's not who you think she is. I laughed bitterly. Yeah, I got that memo when I caught you two at the Oak Room. He shook his head. No, man. It's more than that. She's been lying to both of us. I stared at him, my anger mixing with confusion. What do you mean? Ethan leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper. Amelia's been seeing someone else. Even while she was with me. The words hit me like a freight train. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Someone else? She wasn't just cheating on me, she was cheating on him too. I didn't know whether to laugh or punch him in the face. Why the hell are you telling me this? I finally asked, my voice tight because I was an idiot. Jake, he said, his eyes finally meeting mine. I thought I mattered to her. But I was just another distraction. Same as you. She doesn't care about anyone but herself. I sat back, letting his words sink in. The betrayal cut deep, but hearing that Amelia had played him too? It was almost poetic justice. Almost. That I finished my beer, stood up, and looked him dead in the eye. You made your bed, Ethan. Now lie in it. And with that, I walked out, leaving him behind in the dim, flickering light of the bar. Leaving the Rusty Anchor, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Ethan's revelation rattled me more than I expected. Amelia wasn't just cheating on me with him, she was playing him too. That I should have felt satisfied. I didn't. Instead, I felt like the ground beneath me had shifted again. How deep did her lies go? Who was this woman I married, that night, I couldn't shake Ethan's words. I kept replaying them in my head. She's been seeing someone else. I didn't know if he was trying to make himself look like less of a villain or if he genuinely wanted me to know the truth, but one thing was clear: Amelia's betrayal ran deeper than I thought, and I wasn't done digging. The next morning, I woke up with a singular focus: I needed to know the whole truth. If Amelia was hiding more, I wasn't going to sit around wondering. I wanted answers. That I started with her social media. She hadn't blocked me, probably thinking I wouldn't care enough to check. But there were subtle changes: new friends I didn't recognize, cryptic captions, and photos that didn't add up. One post caught my eye, a picture at a rooftop bar, not with Ethan, but with some guy I'd never seen before. His arm was casually slung around her waist, too familiar to be just a friend that I felt my stomach twist. Ethan wasn't lying, but who was this new guy? I wasn't sure. I wanted to know, but something in me had to. I messaged Mike, figuring he could do some digging. Within hours, he found the guy Ryan, a bartender at that rooftop spot. And guess what? He'd been with Amelia for months, even before Ethan. That I stared at my phone, disbelief turning into something else: clarity. Amelia wasn't just unfaithful. She was a serial liar, playing everyone like pieces on a board. And I realized something important: this wasn't about me anymore. It never was. Finding out about Ryan should have sent me spiraling, but instead, it felt like confirmation, like the universe was shouting, "You see? She was never who you thought she was." I sat at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the fridge the only sound in the house. The divorce papers lay in front of me, crisp and final, like the closing chapter of a book I didn't realize I was reading. 8 years of marriage, reduced to a few signatures and a notary stamp. I ran my fingers over the first page, hesitating for just a second. Not because I had doubts, I didn't, but because it hit me how final this was. There would be no fixing, no working through it. This was the end. I picked up the pen and signed my name at the bottom of each page. My hand didn't shake, not like I thought it would. There was a strange calm in finally taking control of the situation, like I was reclaiming a part of myself I didn't know I'd lost. When the last signature was down, I closed the folder and sat back, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. And that's when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, expecting it to be Mike or one of the guys. But no, it was Amelia. Of course, it was. "I think we should talk." I stared at the message, the words blurring as a wave of disbelief washed over me. Talk? Now she wanted to talk. After cheating with my best friend and some random bartender? After tearing apart everything we'd built? For a moment, I felt the anger bubble back up. But it wasn't the same white-hot rage I'd felt before. This was different. It was almost pity. I set the phone down, staring at it like it might give me the answers I didn't need anymore. After a few minutes, I picked it back up and typed out my reply. "We already did." Simple. Final. I hit send and felt the weight of her betrayal lift just a little more. There was nothing left to say. No explanations, no apologies could fix what she'd done. And I didn't need them. I stood up, grabbed the folder of divorce papers, and placed them by the door, ready to drop them off at the lawyer's office the next morning. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. For the first time since this whole mess started, I knew I was going to be okay. I wasn't just surviving, I was starting to live again. The next morning felt different. I woke up without that usual heaviness sitting on my chest. No racing thoughts. No replaying old conversations in my head, trying to figure out where things went wrong. For the first time in a long time, the silence in the house felt calm instead of suffocating. I got up, brewed some coffee, and watched Riley chase squirrels through the backyard like it was any other day. But it wasn't. Today was the day I'd drop off the divorce papers and officially close the door on Amelia and everything she dragged into my life. As I got ready, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. I didn't look like the guy who had been blindsided by betrayal just weeks ago. The dark circles under my eyes were fading, and there was a quiet confidence in my reflection. I'd been through hell and back, but I was still standing. I grabbed the folder of divorce papers from the table, gave Riley a scratch behind the ears, and headed out. The lawyer's office was a sterile, impersonal place, gray walls, stiff chairs, and that faint smell of old paper and disinfectant. But I didn't care. I was in and out in 15 minutes. Just a few signatures, a handshake, and it was done. Walking out of that office, I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying a backpack full of bricks and finally dropped it at the curb. I got in my car, rolled down the windows, and let the wind whip through the cabin as I drove. No destination, no agenda, just the open road and the realization that my life was mine again. That evening, Mike came over with a six-pack, as he'd been doing pretty regularly since this all started. "So," he said, cracking open a beer and handing me one, "it's official?" I nodded, taking a sip. "Signed and sealed. She's out of my life for good." Mike grinned, raising his bottle in a mock toast. "To fresh starts." "To fresh starts," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. We sat in the backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. For the first time, the future didn't feel like this big, scary unknown. It felt like an opportunity. "Any plans now that you're officially free?" Mike asked, nudging me with his elbow. I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know. Travel, maybe. Get back into some hobbies I let slide. Just figure out who I am without her." Mike nodded, his smile genuine. "Sounds like a damn good plan to me." As the stars started to dot the sky, I realized something: the betrayal, the heartbreak, the anger. It was all part of my story, but it wasn't the whole story. I was more than what Amelia did to me, and my next chapter, it was going to be the best one yet. The days that followed felt like I was breathing fresh air after years of suffocation. There were still moments when the old memories crept in, walking past the spots in the house where Amelia and I had shared laughs, or finding little reminders of her tucked away in drawers. But the sting was fading fast. I started to reclaim my life, piece by piece. I went back to the things I loved, the things I'd put on hold during our marriage. I dusted off my old guitar, the one that had been sitting in the corner of the living room for years, untouched. I started going for long hikes with Riley, exploring trails I'd forgotten were just a short drive away. And then, on a whim, I booked a solo trip. Denver, a city I'd always wanted to visit but never had the chance. Amelia wasn't the traveling type, always preferring to stick close to home, but now there was nothing holding me back. The trip was exactly what I needed. I hiked through the Rockies, stood at the edge of cliffs that made me feel small in the best way, and sat in cozy little bars where no one knew my name. It was freeing. I wasn't Jake, the guy whose wife cheated on him. I was just Jake. When I got back home, I felt different. Stronger. Lighter. Even Mike noticed. "You've got that new man glow," he joked as we sat in the backyard one evening, beers in hand. "Maybe," I said with a grin. "Feels good to finally move forward." And I wasn't just saying it to convince myself. I meant it. The final push came a few days later when I got an unexpected message, not from Amelia. Not from Ethan, from Ryan. "Hey, man. Just wanted to say I didn't know about you and Amelia when we first met. She's been playing games with everyone. We're done, too." I stared at the message for a while, letting the irony sink in. Amelia had burned every bridge she crossed, leaving a trail of chaos behind her. But I wasn't part of that mess anymore. I didn't reply. What was there to say? Instead, I deleted the message, closed my phone, and smiled. It was over, really, truly over, and the rest of my life was just beginning. Life after Amelia wasn't just about moving on, it was about rediscovering myself. With every passing week, the weight of the past felt lighter, and the future looked less like an uncertain fog and more like an open road. I started seeing people again, not dating, not yet, but reconnecting with old friends I'd lost touch with during my marriage. Turns out, a lot of people had noticed the cracks before I did, but no one had the heart to say anything. Funny how hindsight works. One evening, Mike convinced me to join him at a small get-together downtown. Just a few friends, nothing major. At first, I was hesitant. The idea of walking into a room full of people who probably knew everything about my messy breakup didn't exactly sound like a good time, but I went, and that's where I met Claire. She wasn't flashy or overly outgoing, just easy to talk to, with this calm, confident energy that made you feel like you'd known her forever. We started chatting about random things, hiking, favorite books, our mutual love for terrible 80s music. The best part? She didn't know anything about my past. I wasn't Jake, the guy with the cheating wife. I was just me. We exchanged numbers at the end of the night, but there were no expectations, no pressure. It felt normal, and for the first time in a long time, that felt good. A week later, we met for coffee. It wasn't a date, not officially, but the conversation flowed effortlessly. No forced small talk, no awkward pauses. Just two people enjoying each other's company. Eventually, the topic of relationships came up. She told me about her own past, a long-term relationship that fizzled out, but nothing dramatic. Then she asked, "What about you? Ever been married?" I paused, the old ache threatening to rise, but it didn't. "Not like before." "Yeah," I said honestly. But it ended. She wasn't the person I thought she was. Claire nodded, no pity in her eyes, just understanding. Sometimes the wrong people lead us to the right places. That stuck with me, because it was true. Driving home that night, I realized something. What happened with Amelia and Ethan, as painful and messy as it was, didn't define me. It was just a chapter in my story, not the whole book. And now? I was finally ready to turn the page. Weeks turned into months, and life continued to unfold in ways I hadn't expected. What started as casual meetups with Claire slowly blossomed into something more. It wasn't rushed, and it wasn't complicated, it was just easy. And after everything I'd been through with Amelia, easy felt like a gift. But this story isn't about falling in love again. It's about me reclaiming my life after betrayal, finding strength in the places I thought were broken. One evening, Claire and I were sitting on my back porch, Riley at our feet, when she asked me something that stuck with me. "If you could go back and change what happened with Amelia, would you?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. The gut reaction was to say yes, to imagine a world where the betrayal never happened, where I didn't lose my wife and my best friend in one fell swoop. But after a moment, I shook my head. "No," I said quietly. "I wouldn't." Claire raised an eyebrow, curious but not pushing. "Because if I hadn't gone through all that," I continued, "I wouldn't be here now. I wouldn't have learned how strong I really am. And I wouldn't have met you." She smiled, squeezing my hand, and for the first time, I realized how true those words were. The final piece of closure came unexpectedly. One day, out of nowhere, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was familiar. It was from Ethan. "Jake, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But I wanted you to know I've lost everything. Amelia left me, too. Turns out, I was just another one of her lies. I don't blame you if you never want to see me again, but I'm sorry. For everything. Ethan." I read it once, folded it neatly, and tossed it in the drawer. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need his guilt. What he did was his burden to carry, not mine. I'd already let go. Months later, I stood in my backyard, Riley chasing after a frisbee, Claire laughing beside me, and I realized I was happy. Not the kind of surface-level happy you plaster on to hide the pain, but genuine, deep in your bones happy. And if I had any advice for anyone going through what I did, it's this: betrayal hurts. It shakes you to your core. But it doesn't define you. The people who betray you say more about themselves than they ever do about you. You're stronger than you think, and no matter how dark it feels right now, there's light on the other side. Trust me. I've been there, and I made it out better than I ever imagined.